In a world that feels more connected every single day, what happens when an entire nation just decides to build a digital wall and pull the plug? This isn't some sci-fi scenario. It's a real strategy, and it's happening right now.
It usually starts with a moment just like this one. On December 29th, 2025, NetBlocks, which is basically a global internet watchdog, sends out an alert. A sudden, massive disruption hits Iran. Real-time data shows the country's connection to the rest of us just got slashed.
And the drop was just staggering. We're talking national connectivity plummeting to only 79% of what it should be. I mean, imagine over a fifth of your country's internet access just vanishing in an instant. This wasn't some slow fade, this was a switch being flipped.
So, of course, that brings up the big question. Was this just a massive technical glitch? Maybe a cyber attack from the outside? Or was it something way more deliberate, an act of state control? Well, the answer is pretty clear. This was no accident. This was the execution of a well-planned doctrine of control. And to really get it, you have to rewind the clock a bit, all the way back to the Arab Spring. See, this idea didn't just come out of nowhere. Back in 2011, the Iranian regime watched very closely as its neighbors were shaken, and in some cases completely toppled by protests that were organized on social media. They learned a huge lesson. If you lose control of the digital world, you could lose control of everything. So they started building a doctrine that treats the internet not as a tool for the people, but as a political battlefield they had to dominate.
And that doctrine, it has a name: digital authoritarianism. But it's so important to understand that this isn't just about censorship, blocking a few websites. It's a whole system. It combines the physical infrastructure, the actual wires and servers, with intense surveillance and, the real kicker, planned shutdowns designed to do two things: stop protests in their tracks and completely control the public story.
So the how is the really fascinating part. How do you actually do it? How do you build the tech to effectively turn your entire country into a digital island, ready to be cut off from the world at a moment's notice?
The answer, and this is the absolute cornerstone of the whole strategy, is a massive, decade-long project called the National Information Network. You can just call it the NIN. Think of it as Iran's own private, state-controlled internet.
The strategy itself is as brilliant as it is, frankly, terrifying. First, you build your own internal network, the NIN. Then, you make sure that all the internet traffic inside your country, say from one city in Iran to another, stays inside that network. This is key because it separates it from global traffic. Once you've got that set up, you can basically flip a single switch, cutting off the outside world while keeping all your essential domestic stuff like banking, government websites, running just fine on your internal internet. So, to the world, the country is offline, but for people inside, life kind of goes on. But a full shutdown is like using a sledgehammer. It's obvious, and it gets a lot of international headlines. So the regime also has a much more subtle tool in its kit: throttling. Instead of cutting the internet off completely, they just slow it way down. It's a surgical strike. Your text messages might still go through, but trying to upload a video of a protest? Forget about it. Impossible. It stops visual evidence from spreading without the big political fallout of a total blackout. But this is not a one-sided story. Not at all. For every tool of control, people develop a tool to get around it. And what this has created is a constant, high-stakes digital arms race between the state and its own citizens. It is a non-stop game of cat and mouse. The regime builds the NIN, citizens use VPNs to encrypt their traffic and sneak past the blocks. So then the regime uses something called deep packet inspection, which is a fancy way of saying they can electronically open and read your data to find and block that VPN traffic. Okay, so citizens then pivot to things like decentralized mesh networks, where devices can connect directly to each other. And the latest frontier? Satellite internet, like Starlink, which just bypasses the state's entire system. So what's the point of all this? The goal of this high-tech resistance isn't just about accessing blocked websites for fun. It is a fundamental fight to keep a lifeline to the outside world open, to make sure what's happening on the ground gets documented, and to stop the state from being the only one telling the story. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this is a story about Iran. But the reason this matters so much is that Iran's strategy isn't unique. It's actually part of a global playbook, an exportable model for control in the 21st century. Just look at this trend. China's Great Firewall was really the inspiration for a lot of this. Russia has developed its own sovereign internet, they call it RUNET, with the specific goal of being able to unplug from the world. In Myanmar, the military uses digital curfews, shutting down the internet at night so they can conduct raids and arrests in a total media blackout.
This playbook is spreading for sure.
And they are not figuring this out in isolation. Oh no. These regimes are sharing technology, they are sharing tactics, they're learning from what works and what doesn't. They're basically forming this unofficial authoritarian alliance that's all about mastering digital control.
A quote from our source material really gets to the heart of what's at stake here. The battle for freedom of information in Iran is not just a technological struggle. It is a battle for narrative, for liberty, and for the ability of citizens to shape their own future. It's about who gets to tell the story and ultimately who controls what happens next.
And let's not forget, the costs of building these digital walls are just immense. They absolutely cripple local economies, especially small businesses that rely on the global internet. They create a new social divide between the people who can afford tools to get around the blocks and those who can't. It destroys public trust, and it costs a fortune in investment that could have been spent on, well, anything else.
You know, the internet was imagined as this tool for global connection, for freedom. But as more and more nations master the art of building these digital walls, we really have to ask ourselves, is the future of the internet one single global network? Or is it a splintered world of national internets, each with its own powerful gatekeeper?